Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports, and we have even more 2023 NBA Draft Night trades to discuss in today's video. I already posted one Draft Night trades video this week, and you guys really loved that video, and it was really successful, and you guys had a lot of great ideas, not only for your own trades, but also just kind of adjusting my trades and kind of just your overall thoughts in the comments section. I had a lot of fun reading through those comments, and I just really enjoyed your guys' insight as well. And I'm looking forward to recording this video and hearing what you guys have to say about these ones as well. If you are new to Utility Sports, make sure to leave a like. Subscribe to the channel for more content. It really goes a long way in letting me know that you're enjoying the content. I'm in the process right now of kind of setting up my brand new studio. Hopefully you guys are excited for that. I know I am. And let's jump into the video preview here. And we have 7 brand new trades to discuss with 13 different teams to feature. Now you might say, well, 7 trades, there should at least be 14 teams. The Orlando Magic are featured twice because I had 2 different trade proposals that I thought could make some sense for them. There's also progressively bigger trades. So the beginning of the video, the first few trades, maybe not as grand and maybe not as, wow, that's a crazy trade. But towards the end, there's a few that are like, wow, that could really shape the landscape of the NBA. So I'm excited to talk about those, maybe end with a Damian Lillard trade. We'll see what's in there. Then we'll also look at kind of just the framework and just my overall thought process for these trades. Value subjective. So there's going to be people who disagree. And I think for the most part, it's kind of playing out ideas and thinking, does this make sense? Is this something we could potentially see or not? For the most part, you know, you might disagree. Well, maybe one more pick or one less pick, or that's a little bit too much to give up, or perhaps you think, hey, that's way off. That's not even close. I'd love to hear those things in the comment section. Just be respectful about them and maybe just view players a little bit differently than I do, which is sometimes how we get very lopsided trades in NBA history. You're just looking at 2 GMs that valued players differently. Then also leave your trade ideas down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Players you would like to see on the move, potential ideas that you have. And then don't forget to check out that other video that posted this week as well. Hopefully there'll be a link in the description to that one or a card here in this video. So jumping forward now into our very first trade, and we're going to get right off the bat talking about the Orlando Magic. And this is a trade that kind of sneakily works out pretty well for both sides, I think. And I do think there's some pretty good rationale. Malik Beasley has a team option for this next season. The Lakers could theoretically decline that and try and go into this offseason with a little bit of cap space, but there'd have to be some other moves that would accompany passing up on Malik Beasley's team option. Because of that, I could see them actually accepting his team option with the idea of, we're going to use that money as a trade asset. And a lot of people like to line up Malik Beasley and a few other contracts to get to a big number. You could theoretically do that with Mo Bamba. But here's kind of a smaller trade, and one that does work out pretty well for both sides, because the Orlando Magic really badly need perimeter shooting, specifically someone who functions off the ball and is just ready to catch and fire. And Malik Beasley is one of those players. A massive amount of his shot attempts from the field typically come from behind the three-point line. He's got very deep range, and he can shoot on the move and finds a good center of balance typically. Now, I know he fell out of favor there in LA, especially in the playoffs, but for Orlando, you're not necessarily worried about if Malik Beasley is going to be a big-time playoff contributor for you. This is a move to help you in the regular season and kind of space the floor a little bit more. You're also getting pick 47 back in this deal. And for Orlando, what you're giving up, Jonathan Isaac, who, yes, if he stays healthy and stays on the floor, it's a huge loss, because I think Jonathan Isaac is a better player than Malik Beasley. But the reality is we just haven't seen Jonathan Isaac on the floor in what feels like forever. And I think at some point Orlando might have to look at themselves in the mirror and say, this may or may not be the time to actually cut ties with Jonathan Isaac, as unfortunate as it is. For me, Jonathan Isaac was a player who I think had Defensive Player of the Year type potential with how good he was on that end of the floor early on in his career. I think he could have been a transformational defensive player. The issue, though, is you have to stay healthy to win an award like that, and he just hasn't been able to do it. Shout out to Lakers fans, by the way, for photoshopping literally every single player in the NBA to Lakers jerseys, because I was not expecting to be able to find a Jonathan Isaac Lakers graphic to use for this video, but there it is, Jonathan Isaac in a Lakers uniform. and you also move up 11 spots in this draft. And you might be saying, well, how does this really work for the Lakers and the Magic? You said that you think, hey, Jonathan Isaac's a better player than Malik Beasley, and you have the Lakers moving up in the draft. What type of Lakers homer are you? I'm not a Lakers homer here. The reality is Malik Beasley is available and plays. Jonathan Isaac so far hasn't been able to, and I think this solves a bigger need for Orlando than it does for the Lakers. Now, I do think Jonathan Isaac plus Jared Vanderbilt is a very intriguing defensive duo, especially given the fact that you also have Anthony Davis, of course, one of the better rim protectors and just interior and kind of hybrid defenders in the league. You now add Jonathan Isaac, who, when he is on the court, is a phenomenal defender, and you have that next to Vanderbilt, who is really impactful for the Lakers once they acquired him from Utah. Isaac, I think, is a good player. I think he would be an intriguing fit onto this team. Now, I think the Magic's need for shooting is a little bit more significant, and just the fact that Isaac has been on the court significantly less makes it kind of a no-brainer as to why the Magic should be giving up maybe a slightly better asset. The Lakers move up 11 spots in the second round. They end up having really not that much extra money come in the door, $875,000 actually only as an increase. So it's not too significant. I think the Lakers, they get a player who I could see them utilizing, and they move up in the draft, and the Magic get a player that they could definitely use without giving up anyone who was a significant part of their rotation this past year, where they definitely saw a big step forward, and I think they're expecting another one this next season, which means if we're talking about Orlando, let's look for not only one shooter in Malik Beasley, but maybe a second shooter to add in as well, and that would be Doug McDermott, who they could take in using some of their cap space. Now, there's been some rumors about Fred VanVleet. Could the Magic look to pay him? What will they do with their cap space? For me, I think Orlando's in a spot where they don't have to realistically go out and pay. I think finding players for the right price points via trade might be the best way to go. And if you can kind of whisk Doug McDermott away from San Antonio, it might be definitely worth it, because he's a player who has shot the laces off the ball before in the past, and he rips the cords consistently. He's a really nice shooter. Of course, I don't have to tell you that, but you also get 2 first-round picks back, a future first from the Toronto Raptors through the Spurs here, and then also that 2026 first via Atlanta, and you get pick 44 in this draft. It does cost you pick 11, but the Magic currently have pick 6 and 11. In a lot of my mock drafts, I've talked about the likelihood that Orlando would look to draft a shooter there. Oftentimes, I've looked at Grady Dick. This past mock, I looked at Bilal Coulibaly for them. I think that those are good options, and those are nice long-term pieces. But Orlando, you think back to kind of what's revolutionized this rebuild for them, and it was the moment that they traded Nikola Vucevic for 2 first-round picks. You're now able to turn that second first-round pick you got for Vuce, the first one was Franz Wagner, you can turn around now and change that second one into 2 more additional firsts. So you now have that 2026 first from Atlanta, that 2024 first from Toronto, and you've ultimately turned Vucevic then into 3 first-round picks with the ability to maybe trade out in future years as well. And you can continue to expand and build on how many assets you've been able to acquire for Nikola Vucevic, and it pushes some of your assets down the road for when you have a better feel of, hey, what do we need to use to put around Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner? I think shooting's the clear and obvious answer. You address that a little bit here with Doug McDermott. So you're kind of addressing the shooting without having to expend that asset on a Grady Dick. And for San Antonio, they're coming in here and getting a player I know a lot of Spurs fans would love to see on their roster in Cason Wallace. And you might say, well, if the Magic are so gung-ho on getting a couple extra first-round picks here, why would the Spurs be the team willing to part with those assets? And it's because they have so many selections. They've got picks from a whole bunch of teams. They got picks from the Bulls, they got picks from the Raptors, they've got picks from the Hawks. Just seemingly the Spurs have like a boatload of picks, and this is a good opportunity to come back in and draft a player that I'd be very comfortable with them developing. Cason Wallace, maybe some people are a little bit lower on him because of his physicals, only measured in at 6'2" without shoes. That might be a red flag to some teams, but San Antonio knows what they're doing. They see the defensive capabilities that Cason Wallace has, and I think realistically for this team, the Spurs are loaded with guys who can defend. I think Vassell's an underrated defender. Keldon Johnson's screen navigation is really underrated, one of the better in the NBA at that, honestly. Victor Wembanyama is going to be fantastic in a variety of defensive schemes just with his length and size, and then also just his lateral fluidity. And then you also add in a guy like Cason Wallace, who's another really good screen navigator, a smart instinctual defender. I think he would make San Antonio a really good defensive team. I haven't even mentioned Jeremy Sohan yet. The Spurs would have a lot of defensive talent, and I think for the end of Greg Popovich's coaching career, however many more years that would be, you want to put a good competitive product on the floor for him. He deserves that with how well of a coach, how great of a coach he's been for San Antonio. And I think realistically at this spot, if they move back up for Casey Wallace, it's going to be a really nice selection for them, and they're going to turn him into a really good player. And the Magic add to their asset pool. They still have pick 6 to draft high, and they get a shooter in this trade too. I think it works out pretty well for both sides. Moving on to trade number 3, here we have a deal between the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Atlanta Hawks. And this one, kind of similar to this most recent trade that we saw, where we've got future assets coming in for one team, and we have a team that has a lot of future assets moving back into the first round to get somebody else that they like. The Oklahoma City Thunder currently have pick 12. A player that I know that they really like that they had in the building is Grady Dick. That's who I would currently suspect them to take 12th overall. But I do know that they've had another player in their facility who in Leonard Miller, another player that I 100% can guarantee is a Sam Presti type of player, because back in his prep days, he played a little bit of point forward, had the ball in his hands quite a bit for Team Canada and some FIBA play. He was kind of pushing in transition and making plays on the move as a facilitator. Now for G League Ignite this past year, he completely switched up his game, and I think it was really great for his production. Put up 18 points a night, 11 rebounds a game, including over 3 offensive rebounds a game as well. His rebounding percentage was through the roof, and I think for Oklahoma City, that's one of the few elements that you're concerned about long-term is, can this team rebound the ball? I think his want to would go a long way in kind of reshaping how this team looks. Chet Holmgren's addition would be fantastic for them, as well as a defensive big, just his ability to protect the rim and his length and size. And then, of course, you get to the skill set. Oklahoma City is going to be able to 5-out you to death if they want to. They've got the ball skills. They've got the talent to do that. They've got the shot making and the perimeter shooting in general to kill you that way, especially if you come out and draft Grady Dick 12th overall. And then if you get this kind of crazy athletic, productive forward who has really progressed in the last 12 months, I think you put him in a spot where Oklahoma City would be the best landing spot. Even if they didn't draft Grady Dick at 12, it would be such a good landing spot for Leonard Miller. But if they can get back up into the draft at 15, jump above some other teams like Utah, the Lakers, a few other teams in that range that would maybe consider Leonard Miller themselves, this is a big swing and a big hit, in my opinion, by the Oklahoma City Thunder. And for the Hawks, this is Landry Field's first draft as general manager. And currently with where they're at, remember, they owe assets out the door. Kind of resetting the table for himself would be a nice move, specifically when you look at kind of how young and how many players are on their roster already. They're not in a spot where a player that they draft at 15 is necessarily going to be a big minutes guy for them right away. And because of that, they might look at themselves and say, let's be patient here. Let's try and get extra assets in. And from there, we can kind of make better decisions about what we need and how to accumulate talent. And here they get not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 total draft picks. Now, 2 of them are first rounders. One of them is a 2024 first via the Clippers through Oklahoma City from the Paul George trade. Who knows how the Clippers are going to be next year? Very possible that their 2 stars miss half the season, and perhaps the Clippers miss the playoffs like they did a year ago. That could be a lottery pick. Very good asset to have if you're Atlanta. You're also getting the Oklahoma City Thunder first round pick next year, which they missed the playoffs this year. I wouldn't bet on them missing it again next year. I think the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to take another big step forward and make the playoffs next season, but who knows? Maybe that pick is still a lottery selection. It could be right on the fringe there, probably a top 20 pick if I had to guess, but I wouldn't completely cement that in. But you're still looking at 2 early picks next year relatively. You're also getting pick 37 in this draft, and for a player that I've liked to mock to them at 15, that's been Jordan Hawkins out of UConn, a really good movement shooter. Well, guess what? At 37, you're probably going to be able to draft Seth Lundy, who I have on the graphic, out of Penn State, a player who he's really dynamic as a movement shooter as well. And I would argue that he's the second best, maybe tied for the best movement shooter in the draft because of the way he played at Penn State. A lot of usage off of a variety of off-ball actions, getting him shots on the move. So if you're thinking Jordan Hawkins is a legitimate draft selection possibility at 15, why not move down, get Seth Lundy at 37, pick up future assets as well. You also get a 2024 second rounder. It gives you more flexibility. And this, for a team that kind of owes picks out the door to San Antonio, I think improving their flexibility is key And I think if Landry Fields wants to build this thing the correct way, this is a really good step to do so. And I think this is a huge win for both teams involved. OKC goes up and gets a guy that they love. The Atlanta Hawks still solve a need. Off-ball movement, really important for them, but they get long-term assets that they need to have in the door, in my opinion. I think it's a really good and strong move for both franchises. Moving on to trade number 4 now, we look at a deal here between the Philadelphia 76ers and the Utah Jazz. And this is where we get into some of those bigger, wow, what's exactly going on in this deal type of trades. The other ones I think have been a little bit clearer, a little bit easier to follow. This here is one that on paper you look at this and say, what the heck is this value? The Jazz are getting the best player in the deal, and they're also getting a 2029 lottery protected first round pick. How does this work? How does this happen? And I think on draft night, if we saw something like this come to fruition, we would have a really good idea on the status of James Harden, whether he's going to return or not to the Philadelphia 76ers moving forward. And what I mean by that is if they make a move like this where they dump Tobias Harris's contract somewhere, he's going into the final year of his deal at $39 million, you're essentially realizing that, look, they're not confident that Harden's coming back, and now they're pivoting to a team that could act with cap space. And who would they maybe look to sign with cap space? I don't know, maybe their brand new head coach, Nick Nurse, maybe his former point guard, Fred VanVleet, who's a free agent this offseason, I think would be a realistic option for this organization. And on top of that, if you're the Sixers, so you do eat Rudy Gay's contract, I'm sure that if that was the situation that played out, they would likely look to stretch and waive him, which would save them significant money this year. Now, you would have to owe him some money, and it would hurt your cap situation for the next couple of years thereafter, but it would open up significant flexibility right now. Damian Jones and Lucas Samanic would be two bigs who are relatively young, very unproven up to this point, but maybe those are some swings that the 76ers would take on young guys to get at least some more bodies in, specifically in the front court, where they've had so many issues year after year. I think Paul Reed's really stepped up big time. I think if you're looking at the Sixers long term, you have to count on him being the backup big behind Joel Embiid for the foreseeable future. But for an 82-game regular season where Joel Embiid does miss, stretches of games, I think having a couple more bodies in there helps you, and they're low price points, $2.5 million, $2 million. And as you can see, the big thing here, if you're Philadelphia, you're opening up $30 million in cap space, which is a significant change. And if you're going to lose James Harden, and ultimately his cap holds off the books, the 76ers go from a team with absolutely no way of improving through free agency, essentially, to a team that all of a sudden has a lot of cap space and can be big time players starting July 1st if they want to act that way. And I think, on draft night, again, if we see a deal like this, that's what you would expect, that they're lining up for something in free agency. And again, I think Fred VanVleet's the most likely outcome there. And if you're looking at it from Utah's perspective, I think it's pretty obvious. You're getting a protected asset in that 2029 first, and you're eating Tobias Harris for a year. And if you're Utah, you probably play Tobias Harris. He probably plays relatively well for you. This is one of those deals that, trust me, you look at it and you say, there's no way that this deal should happen. It doesn't make sense. But we've seen deals like this play out in the past where teams get off of a massive deal because they have other plans, other things that they want to execute. Daryl Morey's the king in the NBA when it comes to having like 18 plans at once that he wants to pull off. Sometimes it's very ambitious and you have to do something kind of crazy to get there. This is one of those examples, but I do think it's something that's a little bit more realistic than probably you would think at first glance. Trade number 5 now, we move on to a trade here between the Phoenix Suns and the Los Angeles Clippers, and it does involve Chris Paul. Now, I know there was reports from Chris Haynes saying that the Suns are waiving Chris Paul, but then Shams Charania and Adrian Wojnarowski both chimed in and said, look, this situation is a little bit more fluid than was originally thought. The Suns, could potentially bring back Chris Paul after waiving him. They could look for a potential trade for him, and this is the avenue that I'm looking at as a trade option. And it's back to the Los Angeles Clippers, where he did spend a decent amount of his career. And before being traded to Phoenix, the Clippers were actually the other team involved with Sam Presti and the Oklahoma City Thunder on a potential trade, landing him back with the Clippers. Ultimately did not happen. Makes you think what could have been had he went back to the Clippers, and maybe that team wins the finals or at least makes the finals. Who knows? But in addition to Chris Paul, you're also landing DeAndre Ayton here. if you're the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, this is kind of the Suns reverse engineering some of the Kevin Durant trade. They're getting off of Chris Paul's money. They're getting off of DeAndre Ayton's massive contract, which they never really wanted to give him. Indiana put them in a really tough spot by signing him to that offer sheet when he was a restricted free agent, and it put Phoenix in a really tough spot where they basically had to match it, even though they didn't really want to internally, and they always looked at it as kind of an asset that they would later trade. And, it's a tough one to swallow because it drafted him first overall. But realistically, I think the Suns are going to prioritize depth. This is a good opportunity for the Clippers to get their floor general, someone who can really guide the ship for them. And at times they need that. And they also get a big man who's relatively young still. Not even relatively young, just flat out young. And of course, talented. Probably one of the more talented young bigs in the league. And the Suns, you get not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 guys you can realistically play in your rotation in the regular season. And I would say comfortably 3 guys you could play in the playoffs, maybe 4 with Robert Covington. At this point, I don't think Marcus Morris is much of a playoff contributor anymore. But you get Russell Westbrook in a sign and trade around the taxpayer mid-level exception. So it's a relatively team-friendly deal. And if you are trading out Chris Paul, getting Russell Westbrook back on a cheap deal that can help you long-term is definitely something that I think would go a long way in helping Phoenix stay competitive. You also get, like I said, Marcus Morris, Robert Covington. You're adding 2 forwards into the grouping. You're getting Norm Powell, who is arguably one of the most important pieces of this deal, another scorer for Phoenix off the bench. I think at points we saw with Phoenix that scoring the basketball outside of Durant and Booker is going to be a challenge for them. And I think Powell would alleviate some of that. And you're also still getting a guy who can do the dirty work for you for an 82-game season. And at points of the playoffs as well, Ivica Zubac, I think an underrated center. Now, definitely not nearly as skilled as DeAndre Ayton, but one thing he does that Ayton doesn't constantly do is work hard. Zubac works really, really hard in the glass. You think to his 30-point, 29-rebound game he had earlier this year as an example of that. I think the Suns really do get a lot deeper with this trade, which was one of the big flaws of trading away Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Jay Crowder all in one deal. Of course, Crowder wasn't playing for them, but assuming he was on a roster spot, which is exactly what he was, they were getting a big nothing out of that slot. And trading him, yes, it didn't make them thinner, but they were already thin because of his absence, I would say. And they got even thinner after trading Bridges and Johnson away for Durant. And because of that, they need to kind of come back and flip that around. The Suns also received pick 30 and pick 48 in this draft. So this is a real swing by the Suns to add a lot of depth. And you might say, well, why did the Clippers do this if you think, oh, they're getting so much depth and decent talent that you can arguably say would play in the playoffs for them? The reason why is the Clippers are loaded on depth. They don't need more depth pieces. They need to make a consolidation type of trade. DeAndre Ayton, you could argue, will be the best player from the deal. Over the next 4 or 5 years, that's what you should probably safely project. And because of that, it gives the Clippers a young player to kind of have as a build-around piece long-term. Whether or not he actually stays there for the long haul, we'll see. But it does give you a young player to have as kind of a building block. Even if it's not a great building block, it's still a building block. And I think the talent level could be very beneficial for the Clippers. And then realistically, Chris Paul, I mean, the Clippers do such a good job load managing that Chris Paul would probably take 3 weeks off every month. But the real thing is they'd prefer him to be healthy in the playoffs. And so far, the Clippers, that's a huge if that we've been saying now for nearly half a decade. You can't really count on it for Chris Paul or for anyone on the Clippers, seemingly. But realistically, they're lining themselves up to have their best shot at winning a title. And we'll see if they ever get it done. But I think this is a pretty interesting trade infrastructure to at least talk about. Trade number 6 now. We move on to a deal between the Golden State Warriors and the Toronto Raptors, and it's one that I think is going to intrigue a lot of people because the Warriors land not 1, not 2, but 3 contributors for a playoff run. I think the Warriors were a team that really kind of struggled this year in terms of integrating some of that youth and meshing it with those old guys, with Curry and Clay and Draymond. And I think Steve Kerr's talked about that this offseason quite a bit of, there has to be a certain maturity level in the locker room, and there has to be a willingness to want to do the things it takes to win and putting the team above yourself. And I think at points we saw with the Warriors that players weren't willing to do that. And a lot of people would instantly think maybe of Jordan Poole and his play style and how it didn't necessarily mesh with the Golden State Warriors. And of course, I think that Draymond Green, Jordan Poole saga of drama that we saw before the season did impact the year that they had. So now they're going to ultimately make a decision on that, and they're going to trade away Jordan Poole. The Warriors here get a great player, a player who's going to be a fantastic addition for them in OG Anunoby. Really, you take some of the young guys out and you give them a player who's ready to compete at the highest level, impact winning, and play the game the way that he's supposed to, in a role that I think is going to have a bigger role in Golden State than he would in Toronto because of the ball movement. I think it's just going to open up a little more opportunity for him to score. You also get Otto Porter Jr. back, who is a player that obviously was pivotal for them when they went on to win the title this most recent season. And then Thaddeus Young, at this point, he's not going to give you a ton. Thaddeus Young's seen better days in the NBA, but he is still another body, another forward option to give the Warriors a little bit more length, size, and switchability during the regular season. And for Toronto, yes, you're giving up a lot here. OG Anunoby, a player that a lot of Raptors fans love. Otto Porter Jr., he hasn't really played very much for the Raptors since they signed him. Thad Young's whatever at this point. I don't think the Raptors are really too worried about Porter Jr. or Young in this deal. But moving on from OG Anunoby is a very tough decision. So you have to get really good compensation back. And that's exactly what the Raptors are getting here. And it's a real decision, and I would say franchise-altering decision even for the Warriors, because with Bob Myers no longer running the ship for the Warriors, I think some of the relationships are less important. And the fact that Bob Myers was always big on, hey, we're trying to be the Spurs, we're trying to draft and develop while we have Curry, Clay, and Draymond. And I think we saw how difficult that is and how impossible it is to really achieve that. So new decision making means new decisions, and that decision is to move off of some of the young guys, to move off of Jordan Poole, who was very up and down and mostly down this past season, where he just did not have a good year. He now gets rerouted to Toronto, along with Jonathan Kuminga, former top 10 overall pick. Raptors fans are probably ecstatic to see Kuminga in this deal. Patrick Baldwin Jr., a first-round pick last year. I don't think he was a warranted first-round pick, but he does have some perimeter shooting touch. Nonetheless, that Toronto could badly use. This team does not shoot the ball very well at all. You get two guys who are real good shot makers from the perimeter, Baldwin Jr. on spot-up opportunities, and then also just Jordan Poole off the dribble. Some of the shots he does make is kind of like a wow factor of, wow, did he really just make that shot? You also get pick 19 in this draft and a 2026 unprotected first-round pick. You're getting 2 firsts. You're getting Jordan Poole, who I think, yes, maybe a little bit of an overpay on his contract, but still an intriguing young player. He's not anywhere near his prime yet, and he's playing in a tough system to really showcase what I believe his talents are. Then you're also getting a young wing in Jonathan Kuminga, who I think has massive potential, and then Baldwin Jr., a floor spacer for you. I think that the deal here is actually pretty well aligned. The Warriors have a decent amount to offer, and if they want to get serious about landing OG Anunoby, I think that they can get themselves in the mix by offering up some of these young guys. And ultimately, this is a tough call for the Raptors, in my opinion. Could you argue that, hey, they're just better off keeping OG Anunoby? I 100% agree that that's a realistic possibility. But at the same time, this Raptors team, I don't think is heading in the right direction. With Van Vliet and Gary Trent Jr. both headed toward free agency, maybe kind of an infusion of youth to match Scottie Barnes' timeline a little bit better makes more long-term sense potentially for the team. Now, as we go on to trade number 7, this is a deal between the Portland Trailblazers and the Miami Heat. And there is that Damian Lillard trade as promised. I told you guys it was coming, and Damian Lillard has been nothing short of dramatic this offseason. I swear I can't take it anymore. Blazers fans, I'm sorry. I know you guys love Damian Lillard, but I swear it's every single day that he's either on Instagram Live saying, oh, it'd be crazy to play for the Heat. I would prefer them, obviously, I believe was his quote, in fact. I'm just tired of it, okay? It's like the high school relationship where the couple doesn't want to date anymore, but neither of them wants to be the person that broke up with the other one. Like, I just don't think Damian Lillard actually really wants to be in Portland anymore, but I feel like he's built so much of his legacy off of his loyalty there, which is such a great thing, by the way. But I just feel he's like at the point of his career where he's like, man, winning would be so awesome. And if Miami loses in the NBA Finals, I think that there's a legitimacy to this type of trade package that we could see play out on draft night. And it's a really strong offer for both sides. The Heat get Kevin Knox and Nasir Little in here as well. Nasir Little, I think, would have a really great growth period in Miami. Kevin Knox is just in here to make the money a little bit closer and kind of help out the Blazers financially getting off of him, assuming they pick up his team option, which, realistically you could. And it gets you the ability to get closer to Kyle Lowry's contract, who they would have to take back in, just given the fact that you're trading Damian Lillard at his near $46 million deal. It's going to be hard to match the money otherwise, and Lowry's one of the few players that the Heat would love to give up in this. You also get Tyler Hero back, who has not played much in the playoffs at all, really. Played the first couple games of the postseason before, of course, hurting himself diving on the floor for a loose ball. Tyler Hero, 20-point per game scorer, would be really the foundational piece here for the Trailblazers to get back. I think realistically at some point we would maybe see him even get rerouted somewhere else. The Blazers would maybe feature him offensively for a little while going into next season. Probably could average 25 to 27 points a game, which I know sounds crazy. Now the team wouldn't probably win very much, but they would use him in a lot of different ways to give him the opportunity to score the ball, and you could probably turn around and reroute him somewhere else for maybe a couple first-round picks or more, and you get 3 first-round picks, one of them this year, pick number 18, to go along with picks 3 and 23, which they already have, and then you get 2027 first-round pick and a 2029 first-round pick, ultimately giving the Blazers a vast collection of future assets by moving off of Damian Lillard, and I think right now is the right time to do it. You have pick number 3. You have the ability to draft one of Scoot Henderson or Amen Thompson, players that I know they both like from the pre-draft process. They had them both in for individual workouts. The Blazers are in a spot where they can replace Damian Lillard, as tough as that is, as tough as it is to see the franchise guy walk out the door. Right now is probably the time. He's in his 30s. He's a smaller guard. He's been dealing with more and more injuries in the past couple of years. Not that that's necessarily a red flag, but it's not a green flag either. And I think that realistically, if you look at where the Blazers have finished since hiring Chauncey Billups, it hasn't been good. And it's not that Chauncey Billups isn't the right coach. It's just they don't have the right roster. They don't. They're just not that good comparatively to other teams in the league. And you can make reasons and excuses as to why. The reality is, in the standings at the end of the day, they haven't been a playoff team for 2 years in a row now. At the end of the season, they're more focused on draft positioning than playoff seeding. And because of that, right now might be the time to blow it up, especially if Damian Lillard continues to put pressure on the organization and possibly request a trade at some point. We'll see if that ever comes to fruition or not. But I think if it does, this is maybe the trade package that gets it done. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do hope you enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun recording this one. Again, this has been a bevy of extra NBA draft night trades that we could potentially see. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section. Leave some of your own trade ideas down there as well. Go hit that follow button on Twitter, by the way. Links in the description for that. And subscribe here on the channel for more. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.